A new thesis.
Hey everyone, thanks for coming to my talk. I do have slides. That's my first slide. What? Oh. Oh, there we go. I will say, I just want to clarify before I start, I made my own slides. And so what you're seeing is not low effort, it's just low talent. But so the thing that I'd like to talk to everyone about is something that we've been really focused on lately at Polygon, and it's what we call the aggregated blockchain thesis. And you can think of it as a response to the fact that crypto, like when we talk about scaling in crypto, we're sort of stuck between the monolithic and the modular approaches to scaling. And so if you think about what the monolithic view says, it says that when we talk about scaling and scalability in crypto, what we really mean is scaling access to liquidity, scaling access to shared state. And so the idea that we can scale by adding a bunch of different chains doesn't fix this problem, if it means that we are fragmenting liquidity or fragmenting state. And so the modular view, the response is, just like the internet cannot run on a single server, we can't run an internet-scale crypto ecosystem on a single chain. And moreover, different applications have sort of heterogeneous requirements for security and centralization and latency and UX. And so even the idea that we would put all of those applications on a single chain doesn't make sense in a certain sense. But the problem with the modular approach is, as we can see on Ethereum, we have a bunch of L2s. So we're scaling horizontally by adding more and more L2s. But we're running into this issue where liquidity, state, and users are fragmented across all of these chains. So you have like AMM pools and liquidity on Arbitrum, on Optimism, on Polygon zkVM. And it's actually really difficult to share liquidity and state in a trustless way between those chains. So I'd like to claim that when we talk about unified liquidity, this vision requires two things. So it requires that assets be fungible across chains. So if I have ETH on Polygon zkVM, I want to do something on Polygon POS, like I want to swap to USDC, I should be able to take my ETH and move it to Polygon POS and get ETH back. I shouldn't get a wrapped synthetic version of that token. And the second requirement is that we should have super low latency for cross-chain interactions, both asynchronous and synchronous. So if we think about the current state, we don't have either of those things, right? If we want to bridge trustlessly between two L2s, like let's say we want to go from Polygon zkVM to Arbitrum or to zkSync. I need to take my ETH on Polygon zkVM. I create a transaction to withdraw that ETH. I have to wait for a proof to be generated. I need to wait for that proof to be verified on L1, for that block to be confirmed, and then for my deposit to be credited to Arbitrum or zkSync. So all in, that takes like 40 minutes. And so that's an unacceptably long time and delay for good UX and for unified liquidity. And so in some sense, the Polygon's aggregation layer, the aggregation thesis, is a response to fixing this problem. So it's the goal is to provide safety for asset fungibility across chains and for super low latency interaction, whether asynchronous or synchronous between chains. So I didn't create this GIF. This was the very talented Polygon marketing team. But we can see that, and we'll get into this, but the introduction of the aggregation layer allows us to move assets between chains in the Polygon ecosystem in a way that is fungible. So we can take all of the L1 native assets and L2 native assets are locked in a unified bridge. And we can take ETH from Polygon zkVM and move it and get ETH on Polygon zkPOS or on A** or the OKX chain. And crucially, we can do that in a super low latency way, still safely. and without a footprint on L1. So we're not limited or bottlenecked by the capacity of L1 to do this cross-chain interaction. And so the first element of the aggregation layer is providing safety for this unified bridge. And so I don't know how technical the audience is. This might get a little bit technical, but the goal with Polygon is to create an ecosystem that gives chains sovereignty. So you should be able to run your own execution environment. You should be able to run zkVM, type 1 or type 2, MIDAN, custom zkVMs with something like SP1. But the problem is that we need some sort of guarantee that if any zkVM is unsound, then it shouldn't be able to drain the bridge of all funds locked on that bridge. And so the first thing that the aggregation layer does is it provides safety for an ecosystem that has heterogeneous execution environments. So even if the custom zkVM that runs like shit chain number 1000 is unsound or is compromised, it can't drain the unified bridge of the funds that are deposited. The second thing that the aggregation layer does is it provides safety for asynchronous composability across chains. So basically what happens is if I'm chain A, or if I'm on chain A, and I want to move funds to chain B, chain A can send a message asynchronously to chain B, and chain B can commit to the state of chain A that resulted in that message. And so the aggregation layer gives a guarantee, a cryptographic guarantee, that chain B cannot be finalized on Ethereum if the state that it depends on of chain A conflicts. So this is a really important point, because if you recall like what's required for trustless interaction between two chains, we need a proof to be generated, but we also need the state corresponding with that proof to be finalized on Ethereum. Otherwise, a chain could equivocate. So this is a way of ensuring that chains cannot equivocate and must be consistent within this ecosystem. Similarly, for synchronous composability, a user can submit a bundle of transactions that execute across a large number of chains. And some mechanism, whether a shared sequencer or a relay, can execute these transactions across chains. And the AggLayer can enforce that these transactions cannot be unbundled. So this is like a really, really important safety guarantee for synchronous composability across chains. Because if we don't have this guarantee, then we could have a bundle being partially executed in the ecosystem. So you could have like a mint transaction be executed on chain B, but not have a corresponding burn on chain A. And so the bridge could become under-collateralized. And so I guess to sum up, there are three safety guarantees that the aggregation layer provides. The first one is safety for asset fungibility. It guarantees that even if a prover or a zkVM somewhere in the ecosystem is unsound, it can't compromise the shared bridge and drain the ecosystem of funds. So in some sense, like soundness issues are quarantined to specific chains where the prover is unsound. And then the second two are safety for synchronous and asynchronous composability. So the way that we think about the AggLayer is it provides this foundation of safety that lets other coordination mechanisms like shared sequencers or relays or block builders sort of be built and exist on top. So you could have a shared sequencer like Espresso or NodeKit that's actually executing synchronous transactions across a large number of chains. And in this way, we're able to have a multi-chain, horizontally scalable ecosystem with thousands or tens of thousands of chains. But for subsets of those chains, they can operate synchronously. And we can give sort of the feeling of using a single chain even as we're in a horizontally scalable ecosystem. And so it's sort of like the best of both worlds, where some chains don't need to interoperate. Like if you're a game or like a social application, you probably don't need synchronous composability with like Uniswap or some DeFi primitive. And so you don't have to pay for it. And so we can have like a heterogeneous execution environment, sequencer setup, and we can sort of allow chains to make trade-offs that make sense for them. So, and again, not to get too deep or too technical, but you might look at this guarantee or how the system has been described and say, okay, what if chain A does equivocate? And so it submits one state to chain A or to chain B and another state to the AggLayer. And so chain B cannot be finalized to Ethereum. There's like a 10 to 15 second liveness delay where an equivocation is detected and chain A might be slashed or something. And so I think it's a really important point to say that if we are allowing cross-chain interop at lower latency than Ethereum finality, we have this intractable problem where we have to choose between either providing safety, so providing this guarantee that chain states can never be inconsistent, that we'll never have a situation where the bridge is under-collateralized or where users lose funds. But we could have delays in liveness if chains misbehave or shared sequencers misbehave. But fundamentally, we have to choose between that view or the view where we'll never have liveness faults, but we also won't have safety because we'll just trust a shared sequencer or the AggLayer or different chains. But in the event that those entities misbehave, then they can steal funds that are deposited on other chains. And so there's sort of more to say about this, and you can read our blog posts, but it's really important to emphasize that this is sort of the best that we can do if we are providing lower than Ethereum latency finality and safety. So in terms of comparisons, I think it's really important to emphasize that this view, this sort of vision of safety and asset fungibility and low latency interop is something that is only possible with a ZK ecosystem. We can't do this with an optimistic rollup. And you can sort of easily see why, because the challenge period that's imposed by optimistic rollups, right now it's 7 days for Arbitrum and Optimism. This makes it so like the latency for a cross-chain interaction is actually even worse than Ethereum finality because we need to wait for the challenge period to expire. And so fundamentally, like being able to have very fast finality with ZK proofs on Ethereum is what allows us to offer safety guarantees and to allow low latency interop. Further, for ZK rollups, like I think that there's a misperception that when we talk about aggregation and the aggregation layer, we're just talking about proof aggregation. And it's really important to emphasize that this is not the case, because you can imagine two ZK rollups that are trying to interoperate. And you have chain A, and it produces two states, like A1 and A2. And both of these states are valid, and so both are secured with a zero-knowledge proof. But chain A equivocates, so it sends A1 to B and A2 to the proof aggregation service. Then B is depending on a state of A that never happened, and so we're not providing a consistency guarantee that allows us to ensure that funds that are on B are safe. So I guess I have 6 minutes for this slide, so maybe I can slow down and spend some time on this one. But so the vision for Polygon under the AggLayer is one in which we have an ecosystem of thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of chains. But fundamentally, these chains retain freedom and sovereignty to basically operate how they want. So they can use whatever token for staking, for operating the chain, whatever token for gas. They can use custom execution environments and ZK VMs. And so they're not giving up anything. And I think that there's a real contrast here between proposals for other sort of roll-up ecosystems where there might be revenue share requirements that are enforced by closed source licenses. There might be restrictions on the types of chains and the types of execution environments that you can run. And so the vision with Polygon is not to be rent-seeking and not to be extractive. Like our view and our bet is that like if you have an environment that's horizontally scalable and where liquidity is shared across a large number of chains, then it's purely a positive sum game for chains to join this ecosystem. Because if you think about how things work for L2s right now, you sort of have to play games. Like you have to launch a token or airdrop or do liquidity mining incentives to bootstrap an ecosystem that will allow you to provide liquidity on your chain. And this is sort of like a completely different approach because the liquidity already exists in the Polygon ecosystem. And it's permissionless to access. It can be accessed by any chain. And so as a builder, you can take, you can focus on what's actually important and what your source of leverage is. So if you're building a game or a DeFi primitive or an NFT mint, you can focus on that, and you can access the liquidity that already exists in the Polygon ecosystem. And so you don't need to worry about bootstrapping an NFT marketplace on your L2 in order to launch an NFT mint. You only need to, okay. You only need to focus on building the best DeFi primitive, the most capital efficient DeFi primitive, or the coolest NFT mint, or the coolest game. And you can take advantage of an existing pool of shared liquidity, an existing user base, and other primitives and applications that can help your users. So yeah, thanks everyone. You can learn more about this on the Polygon blog, on my blog, on Twitter. But yeah, really appreciate everyone taking the time. And